Welcome to Be a Voice. This is Britt Carpenter on USALA Media. I am sitting here today with my guest, Brian Schultz. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Britt. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm well. I've been really looking forward to this for a while.
Nice. Me too. Me too. It's a little early in the morning, though. And
yes.
Still waking up?
I'm very caffeinated.
You're very caffeinated. Nice.
Yeah, I'm on coffee cup number 2 at about 8 a.m. this morning, so I'm feeling pretty good.
All right. So that means there's going to be a bathroom break somewhere involved there.
Probably.
Yeah. Right on. And how far of a drive was it for you today?
About 45. I'm in the Philly burbs.
You're in the burbs. So you came in with traffic today.
Yeah. Got out of New York last night at we came back around like 1 o'clock in the morning, but was really pumped to make this happen. So got up nice and early, got a little bit of sleep, drank a bunch of coffee, and I'm really excited. The space is so cool. And we were talking earlier about, where it started and where it's come from, and I love the way that you guys have obviously built this out organically and the team that's surrounding.
The team's amazing here. Yeah, here at USALA, they've done a great job. I mean, it's evolved. Like everything else in life, it's evolved. And
like us.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Hopefully.
everything else in life, it's evolved. And it's come a long way, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. This is a great team that we have here, and I enjoy doing what I do, because I'm a talker, just like you. So, it works out well. Yeah. So thanks for saying that, and thanks for taking that trip this morning, this early, to come in and do this. So, I appreciate it.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I know who you are because, I've been following you for quite some time on social media, and because we are connected in the realms of the recovery world, because we are both in recovery. Mm-hmm. We are both people that have substance use disorder, and we've been, how long have you been in recovery?
I'll have 5 years on May 25th.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks, man. How about you?
Me, I'll be coming up on 8 years on October 28th.
That's awesome, man. That's great.
It is. I wish I could say every day is awesome.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, for sure.
I think what happens is sometimes people in recovery have to put on a facade once they're in recovery. I mean, as somebody that was fighting, an active substance use disorder and an active addiction, you put on a facade because you don't want people to know that you're in addiction or that you're using.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden when you go into recovery, you don't want people to know you're having bad days sometimes. Yeah. Because every day is supposed to be sunshine. And we talked about that before we started, a little bit about feeding that ego. Yeah. And it's hard sometimes because I think, some people are like, oh, wow, you're in recovery. You're doing so well. Your life is so great. It's on track. Peel some layers back. It still could be a little bit of a shit show.
Of course.
A lot of a shit show.
A lot of a shit show. Yeah, right.
Just have a little bit better handle on it because we're thinking a little bit more clear about it.
Yeah. In the context of interventions, I'm often talking to families like they're going on and on about, drugs are the problem, alcohol is the problem, mental health is the problem. And yes, of course, that is true. From the outside looking in, addiction is the problem. But in reality, it is the addicted loved one's solution to a much deeper problem. And then in recovery, you take away that person's one solution that for, at least an extended period of time was working for them, right? Because we wouldn't become addicted to substances if they weren't achieving some end result. And now you take away their one coping mechanism. And I think people have this sort of, I don't know if naive is like the fair word to say, but you quickly learn that it's not the case, that no, not every day in recovery is fantastic. Things happen in life and you no longer have a substance to cover that up. And hopefully you're gaining new coping mechanisms, right. Either through the 12 steps or something else, but it's a process. And what is important is progress, right?
Yeah, and I think people forget that because, a lot of people's coping mechanisms that aren't in recovery tend to be like, oh my gosh, I need a drink.
Yeah.
I like to say that too, but, I look at the aspect of what happens when I do pick that up, and I do that. And, drinking was never a problem for me. I mean, drinking was a problem with everybody else, but not for me.
Right. It was going great for me.
Yeah, it was fine. It was fine, And then when you start, using heroin, who needs drinking? So it just, But I think what happens is people, once again, I don't know if it's the naivety or if people become jaded and they just think that once again life is all roses, and it's so far from it. We still wake up with our issues. We still have to face relationship issues, work issues, bills. There is no yellow brick road in recovery.
Sure.
There really isn't.
Absolutely. And I think that, it's interesting that I still struggle with so many of the same things that led to me in active addiction. Like we were talking a lot about ego before we got rolling. Like my instinct when I do something like this, I want to show up, Britt, and I want to be the most interesting guest you've ever had. I want to say the most profound thing that only I could think of. I want everyone to think that I'm Johnny 12-step and, you know, like, and it's just not the case, man. It's all ego, right? Like what we have an opportunity to do in conversations like this is form a connection, share experience, and then hopefully somebody is able to say, oh yeah, I can relate to that. You know what I mean? And it's
Absolutely.
a constant, I always have to reposition myself. Like, no, don't go there. Don't let the need for, you know, putting yourself up here take over, and just be open and honest about it.
You know, I think what happens though in recovery though, because they talk so much about, you know, feeding the ego and don't do things for your ego. If you're going to do it, just do it because you're doing it. I think what happens is sometimes it's misconstrued. I mean, is it really feeding the ego, or is it bringing awareness to people that it's okay to do this?
Yeah, that's a
you
good
know, am I feeding the ego when I say to people, you know what, we went out last night with my nonprofit and we served 50 people and we provided these, you know, services and resources to them? Or is it letting people know that, you know, the human side of what we're dealing with? And I think sometimes there's a fine line with anything else. And why shouldn't you feed your ego though?
Yeah.
You know, because if not, who's going to? I mean, a lot of times when we didn't feed our ego, it led us to our addiction.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, because that's the only way we really grew balls was by using.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I would never be looked in the mirror and be like, damn, you look good if I, you know, or, you know, so it's one of those things. And so I struggle with that too.
Yeah.
But you made a comment before and I laughed and I smiled because all of a sudden I just came up with a t-shirt in my head and I just picture this recovery bro, maybe standing on the boardwalk, who knows, with his gold chains, Johnny 12-step. Like, now I see a t-shirt idea, and we're going to have to market that. You know, let's copyright that before this show goes on air.
I love it. Let's do it.
But, you know, what you said is right. And I think, you know, people that aren't in recovery don't really understand it. Just like people who are no longer in active addiction don't understand the people that are sometimes.
How crazy is that we can be not that far removed from it and then still turn around and look at the guy still struggling and be like, I don't understand why he can't get it. Well, I couldn't get it either. You know what I mean? I couldn't get it until I was ready to get it.
And how many years were you in an active addiction?
So, you know, I was kind of a gradual increase. It was maintaining until it was no longer maintainable. But, you know, I started typical partying behavior when I was 15, 16 years old. But then, you know, once I moved on to amphetamines and cocaine around mid to late 20s, is when it really, you know, started having a profound impact on my life, and I started suffering life consequences because of it.
And that's interesting because that mid-20 time, that 25-year-old stage is where we really have a lot of struggles in life to begin with.
Yeah.
Because at 25 is when you're supposed to be looking at things like, wow, where's my house with the white picket fence and the nice car and the six-figure salary and the 2.5 kids or whatever it is nowadays.
Yeah.
And you start to look at that and you're like, but that's not me.
Right.
And now your brain, or at least now I'm talking about myself, my brain started saying to myself, well, if that's not you, what is you? And you don't know, so let's just say screw it and blow it all up.
Yeah.
Or burn it all down, either way.
Absolutely.
And I was a gradual as well. You know, it starts with your drinking and your smoking and your coke, and you're eventually, I graduated into like opiates, and you know that when the pills became too expensive, the heroin wasn't, and you know it's just a gradual. But you know, it's those years that you spend. How many? So you know that gradual. So you've been 5 years now.
Yeah. Got sober when I was 33.
All right. Which is a good age.
It's also, I don't know, it's, at least in my, like the guys that I work with, I put it together a little bit later in life. And I think that part of that is because, and look, obviously everybody gets together at different times. Everybody has a different rock bottom.
Shit, mine came probably then like senior citizen time then for you.
Well, I mean, so like it all depends on what your specific personal circumstances are. And so, and again, going back to like when we're talking to families about interventions, I'll often ask them like, what do you think of when you hear the term rock bottom? And they'll say things like, you know, you've lost your job or you're homeless or you have no money, your family won't talk to you. Okay, yeah, oftentimes that is part of the story, but in the context of intervention, rock bottom has a very real concrete definition. It is that point in every addict's life where a path towards recovery becomes more attractive than staying in active addiction. And so it's a very personalized experience. And for me, you know, until I was homeless, living in a stolen car in California, I was presenting to the outside world that life is great, man.
Of course.
You know, I thought I was fooling everybody.
Rose-colored glasses, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that those of us who have the ability and the drive to put on like a real front and really try to keep up and maintain appearances, whether or not we're successful or not, right? Because like in my head, I'm like, everybody thinks I'm killing it in life. But in reality, everybody knew I had a problem. But until I was, you know, really at the point where my family stepped in and staged an intervention on me, I was living in a lot of delusion where I wasn't willing to accept how low my life had gotten.
So, and you have you progressed from 15 in the normal regular partying to that mid 20 stage where it became a full-blown active addiction for you, where it became uncontrollable. You were living in your car in California, homeless. How did you end up in California, and how did you end up homeless? A lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, basically what happened was, you know, I was a reasonably, again, maintaining a lifestyle through a lot of support of my family. And because they didn't know any better, right? I was always the guy who had, you know, just one thing that just happened to go wrong in his life. And if his family could just bail him out of this one situation, then I would get it together. And then, of course, everything would be fine. And so I lived like that for, you know, early and mid-20s. And I was a medical supply sales guy. I was just barely able to get through college and get a decent job. Medical supply sales guy is what I say instead of saying that I sold adult diapers to hospitals and nursing homes, which is actually a huge industry.
It was better than being a non-medical salesperson.
Right, yeah. I've been a medical salesperson in a different field as well.
Me too, you know, so that's why we're good in marketing.
Right.
But
so, you know, I was kind of holding that job together as, you know, what you were saying about like a lot of people, 25, 26, they start to achieve these things in life, and I wasn't getting there. I had no real intimate personal connections with people. My friendships were struggling. I just felt less than other people. And the more and more that set in, the more my addiction took over. And it started with prescription to Adderall, which is, you know, unfortunately so common. We take a substance to achieve a result, to, you know, to use, to, you know, function better in the world. And for a while it worked until I needed more and more and more, until getting that feeling became my primary focus. And then, you know, responsibilities, which I was barely hanging on to, you know, just by natural ability and salesmanship, those start to fall by the wayside. And I just wasn't doing my job, right? I was falsifying expense reports and, you know, just blowing off work.
You can only lie so much until you can't anymore, and you forget. And so you got to that point, and your family staged an intervention for you?
So not yet. So I was living in Philadelphia at the time. I lost my job. And then I had this idea, which I think is really common for a lot of people who struggle with addiction, that if I could just change where I'm at, I can leave my problems behind. So
yeah, but you don't leave yourself behind.
Yeah, exactly. Wherever you go, there you are.
There you
right?
are.
Yeah. So I decided, I have some family out in San Francisco area of California, and I just decided that, you know, I was just going to pick up. There was nothing for me on the East Coast anymore. And also it was kind of getting to the point where I could kind of feel like people in my life were sort of like sniffing around, like, what's going on with Brian? Like, what's his deal? Like, he doesn't seem to be doing so good. So I thought, you know, if I just get away from them, I'll have the opportunity to still put out this front, like, hey man, his life's going great. He just moved to California. You know what I mean? How exciting for him. Right. And then I stayed with my aunt and uncle out there. and just kind of took some time. And I told myself, I'm gonna reset and refocus and get refocused on career and figure out what I really want to do with my life. And I ended up just getting a job bartending at Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead.
I do.
Yeah, man. So he retired out in San Rafael, California, and opened this awesome music venue / restaurant / bar called Terrapin Crossroads. Unfortunately closed in COVID, but great place to hear great music. Nice. Not such a great place for an addict to try to get away from that sort of behavior.
Like alarms went off in my head when you said, I got a job bartending. I was like, well, okay.
And so that's the thing, right? Like we tell ourselves that we're going to change everything about our lives and we're going to move entirely across the country, and then we gravitate towards the place that is exactly the place that's most likely to allow us to engage in the behavior that we were engaging in before
and
we
bring
left.
you down to your knees.
Yeah, of course. So, right? And so, I mean, from then on, man, I mean, it's a relatively long story, but ruined the relationship with my family in California. There was a situation where I was able to get a loaner car while my car was being worked on, and next thing you know, I was just not returning their phone calls, and I was nowhere to go, no money, living in the rest stop by the Golden Gate Bridge and sleep there at night. I was still maintaining my job, which was going towards my habit. And then family back home, just I wasn't presenting as okay anymore. You know what I mean? Now, if you called me, I would have said, hey man, my life's going great. I'm in California. I'm working for Phil Lesh. But the jig was kind of up, so to speak. So my sister, Erica, called me and just kind of presented me with this opportunity. Hey, I know it's going great in California, but we could really use you here in Florida. She was married at the time, and she had a dog, and they had just moved, and she was like, there's an opportunity for you out here. Johnny, her husband at the time, has a friend, and he has this job, and I don't know if he'd be interested, and I don't want to inconvenience you. She knew what was going on. But tried to present it in a way to meet me where I was at.
Smart woman.
Yeah, my sister is she saved my life. My biggest supporter, besides my parents, but like they have to be, you know what I mean? And she could have given up on me a long time ago, but she did.
That's awesome.
And so I acted like I was doing her the biggest favor in the world. I'm like, yeah, man, I'll go to Florida, sure.
I'll leave California, come to Florida. Yeah, I'm doing so well here.
Meanwhile, it was just like, of course, I was like, oh, thank God, I can get out of here. And again, I have the opportunity to keep up the facade. It's not because I'm homeless living in a stolen car in California. It's because I got this new opportunity in Florida, right? And so again,
with a roof over my head.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for free, right? I wasn't going to go pay rent. Yeah. And so again, it becomes, I'll leave this place and I'll just leave all my troubles behind. So I show up in Florida, and I'm living in her back room with her husband at the time. And I got a job, again, tending bar, like right away. And, it was a couple weeks before, unbeknownst to me, I woke up one morning ready to go to work. And I walked out into the living room, and there was my mom, my dad, my sister, her husband at the time, my boss, and a professional interventionist named Sam Davis from Richmond, Virginia. And when you walk out into that, were you intervened on or anything like that?
No, yeah. I was pretty good with the facade, so but no, I never had. The intervention was never an interventionist. It was just people getting together.
12-step call.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've never done this. So this right here is like, especially, I'll be honest with you. The minute you said you woke up first thing in the morning, I don't like waking up when I'm sober to people in my house or to people around. I'm miserable, so I couldn't even imagine waking up.
So yeah, that's actually really interesting that you say, because I kind of glossed over a part. So my brother-in-law knocks on the door, and he says, "Brian, there's somebody here to see you." And now, as a trained interventionist, I use this tactic, and it's been explained to me why you do that. So picture yourself as a person in an active addiction. You're in a dead sleep, right? It's early in the morning. Somebody knocks on your door. He says, somebody's here to see you. What would be your first thought?
Cops are here. What did I do?
Cops are here, man. Jig is up. Like, what did I do last night? Like, who's coming to get me? What debt do I owe? Who's coming to collect?
Which window can I get out?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where my mind immediately goes. So 9 times out of 10, if you walk out into the living room and you see your entire family there, you're going to be really pissed and you're going to be really sad and really upset. But if you think it's the cops who are there and you walk out and see your family, there's actually a sense of relief.
Absolutely.
So it's a really appropriate way to start off an intervention because you're disarmed. And so that's what they did. They knocked on the door. Somebody's here to see you. I'm coming out like, oh my God, who is it? And it was my whole family with this professional interventionist, and he took one look at me, and I knew exactly what it was, and he said, he's this guy from Virginia, and he's got kind of this drawl, and he was like, hey, Brian, I think you know what this is, man. And he's like, can you have a seat? And then, they got into the intervention.
And you went to treatment then?
Yeah, I had it was an interesting experience. I was in no way, shape, or form did I want to go to treatment. Did I want recovery? Was I interested in sobriety? But I was well aware that. So my sister is not going. Like my sister, I later learned organized the intervention, and she is. She's not somebody who's going to be dissuaded from when she has decided that something is going to happen.
Good for her.
Yeah, man, good for her.
Good for her. Good for her. Good for you. Not many people would do that, and not many people would take the time. And because you are an interventionist now, so you've come full circle almost. Yeah. Like you've come from living in a car to having a roof over your head, but still doing the same behaviors, just in a different state in the sun. This time where it's funny. Florida's like the recovery capital of the world, but it's also the best place to relapse in the world.
Yeah, man.
Having interventionists come and basically that saved your life.
100%.
And here you are now and you are an interventionist. And speaking of that, how did that ever happen? How did you become an interventionist after this?
Well, so, I mean, depending on your spiritual beliefs, you may have a different interpretation. My opinion is that it was, very much a God thing. And as an AA guy, I think, when I say God, I'm talking higher power. I don't necessarily mean a specific God or, a God of my own understanding.
Thank you for saying that, because I've been having a lot of angst and a lot of issues personally, like with that, because people, in recovery, they believe in a higher power, and I think that's important for people to know, because I think a lot of people think that it's strictly a God-based thing.
Yeah.
And it really it's a higher power belief.
Yeah.
And it's whatever you interpret that as being, and it's like recovery your way as long as it's working. So thank you for saying that. But.
Well, yeah, totally. And I think that that's one of the biggest hurdles for like somebody in early recovery to get over that. It certainly was for me. I don't know, like did you have a spiritual background or a religious background or anything?
No,
like that?
It was religious, then it was spiritual, then it was none, because I was like, well, how can I be in this position in life?
Right.
And then when I got there, I'm like, don't jam this down my throat, because, I was the one like, how could I be in this position if there is this almighty higher power? Why am I at where I'm at? So of course then it was a what was me sort of feeling.
Yeah, of course.
It was like, it's all me. It's why is everybody and so why did you come
why
after me?
Why have you forsaken me?
Yeah. So but I've gained my spiritual beliefs again, and I gained my higher power beliefs, and my faith is really returning a little bit, and so yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, but anyway,
it's fun. Before recovery, I used to obsess about. I was very much like a. What is God? And like, I was raised Christian, but it wasn't forced down my throat or anything. Right. I just at a certain point was just like, oh, I really like a lot of what they're saying here, but I'm not sure I believe in X, Y, and Z. And after that, I would often contemplate like, what is it? And like, how's God work? And like, who has the right religion? And all of these questions. And that was a really big hurdle for me in early recovery when people started talking about higher power and God. And I think it is for a lot of people, right? And then somewhere down the line when I was being taken through the steps, my first sponsor was like, okay, get your focus off of that and just try to focus on the prayer and the meditation piece of it, forming a conscious contact with something. Mm-hmm. That was really difficult too, but there was a point where I kind of just felt a connection to something higher, and I stopped trying to understand what that thing could be, whether it's an entity or I'm getting kind of
no, but it's important for people to know that too. Like you surrendered to what you felt
Yeah.
was the spiritual being that was helping you.
Yeah.
And your higher power.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, because we just don't say one day, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know anybody that was strong enough to walk away and be like, hey, I'm done. I'm just going to walk away from this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I was the same way. I mean, I was saying every day as I'm shooting up, I'm done. This is my last time. Hey, you can take that away from me that works, because I don't need that anymore after tomorrow. And then the next day, like, damn, I gave that away. You know?
Yeah.
So, but it's when you said that conscious contact. And it's funny because I think people don't realize this, that, and now I'm going off on a tangent, but did you ever, I'm sure you've watched TED Talks by Johan Hari.
Yeah.
Connections.
Yeah.
And it's a connection. It's a connection to what you believe is going to make your life better.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So anyway,
Connection, the opposite of addiction.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, that just sort of brought me into that.
Sure.
But yeah.
Well, I don't want to stay on the God thing too long, because like there is a point where people just like, okay, we get it. You're spiritual. We get it. But like, I remember I was at a point in rehab, and I was living in a bunk bed. It was a 90-day program. I was in like month 2, and that was like the biggest hurdle, was the spirituality piece. Mm-hmm. And I was on the top bunk, and my buddy Dave, who has since passed, but was just a really beautiful guy. Mm-hmm. He was a Christian guy, and I would often have these sort of like philosophical debates about, because some of the stuff that you were saying, like, well, if God's real, why did he make me this way? Like, why does he do this and that? And
I'm just doing that too, because I know like the guys in the recovery house that we run, they talk about that.
Of course they do.
You know, and it's so yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember we were having a conversation one night about prayer, and I was like, Dave, if God knows everything and he's everywhere and he's got everything predetermined and he knows everything I'm thinking and he knows everything I want, why do I have to pray, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking that this guy's going to get in some sort of like philosophical debate and say something really profound. And he was just kind of quiet for a minute, and he was like, because he loves you and he wants to talk to you. And I was just like, well, wait a minute. That's it? Like, you don't want to like apply reason and logic and like have a long debate about what the whole nature of prayer is? It's just, to him, it was as simple as, I've found this thing in my life that really works for me, mm-hmm. and I feel that there is something out there that cares about me and loves me,
right.
and I don't need to contemplate it more than that. And that was like the first moment that I was just like, well, maybe I'll just like give this a shot and see how it goes. And I kind of dropped my preconceptions about like what I thought a relationship with a higher power was supposed to be like, and just kind of focused on, I'm just going to do this and see how it works without any judgment or preconceptions about it. And only when that pretext is dropped, I think, can something happen. And then eventually it did. And, you know, my understanding, or not understanding, but my feelings are, you know, about a higher power has changed since that time, right?
That's good. And that's especially what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to change and be able to grow and evolve, like we talked about.
Yeah.
How many times did you go to treatment?
Just once, man.
Just once?
Yeah.
Dude, you were a once and done?
Well, yeah.
You are an anomaly.
Yeah. I stayed. So, like, I did a 90-day program, and then I did a 30-day program, which was like a step down, and then I did 6 months in a sober house.
Good for you.
Thanks, man.
Good for you. And it works. You are living proof that it works if you follow it.
Man.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, of course, you know, in my mind, I'm like, I could have done things differently, and we all could have, and stuff like that. But, you know, not to feed the ego once again, like, you know, you try to stay humble.
Yeah.
You know, and people are always like, oh, you're so humble. I'm like, no, I'm just me. Yeah. You know, trust me, if I wanted to go in ego, my head will blow. It's all right. I can let it blow. Did you see that documentary I was in? Did you know the one I was in and run awards? Like, but no, you know, like that might have been, you know, right in the beginning of my recovery, because I wanted people to see that I was not this, you know, J word anymore. You know, I was actually a productive, functioning member of society. Yeah. So the ego grows then. But I think after like that second year in recovery, it just sort of shrunk. You know,
anything particular happened in that second year that led to that, or is it just like a natural progression of working?
I think what happened was I found a place where, for the first time in my life, and I was a late bloomer as far as getting into recovery, because I spent probably over half of my life in addiction. I'm sorry if I spit there, but over half of my life in addiction, and I'm a very stubborn, if you ever met my father before he passed, I'm a very stubborn person, just like my father. I'm very thick-headed, I'm very opinionated, and, you know, I'm one that should keep my mouth shut more than I open it. And I learned all that within those 2 years, that like, it's not all about me.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I was meant to serve, I was meant to give back, I was meant to be able to go out and share my story, but yet help others where they're at and do what you talked about, meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just the biggest kick in the nuts that I needed at that point to be like, dude, you're not that cool. Mm-hmm. You know, just because you're not using drugs anymore, you're not as cool as you think you are.
Right.
Keep it real, keep it humble. And that's what I had to do, and I did. And I mean, at the time I was running a social media platform that had 42,000 followers, and people were just following and loving it. But the funny thing is, I never told anybody I was in recovery. Never told anybody I was fighting active, you know, I was in active addiction forever, because I was afraid. I had that stigma.
Yeah.
I didn't want people to know. Like, people are going to now finally call me that junkie, you know, and I don't want that. But that's where the ego went. Like, you try to hide it once again, but then I wasn't really working. And then once I did, I was able to like become a voice.
Do you remember the moment that it switched, where you're like, this is something I'm going to start talking about?
Yeah, I actually do. I was driving down North 6th Street in Kensington into whatever you want to call it, Fishtown or Liberty's border, whatever. Like, it was like 6th and Master. And right at the PHA there was a gentleman lying on the top of a car, and he was lifeless. He was overdosed. And I got out, and people were like, yeah, just leave and die, da, 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 da. And I'm like, ooh. So I called 911. I didn't have Narcan on me, because at the time, Narcan wasn't a thing, stuff like that. But I was like, I need to tell somebody about this. I need to tell somebody that this is where I was, because I had overdosed 5 times. And I never told people I overdosed 5 times, because I don't want people to think about it. But here's this guy that was laying here lifeless, dead, in front of me. That was me at one point. He came back, they got him back, put him in the ambulance, stuff like that. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm not going to use my voice for others to learn from what I just saw and where I was, then I'm useless.
Wow.
Then I am just another, you know, person walking around that's known by a number, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that was to feed my ego then too, to help me. But that was a very powerful moment for me.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, so yeah, that was that aha moment where I was like, it's okay.
It's fantastic.
You know, people in addiction are people too.
Yeah.
Just because you use drugs doesn't mean you're not a person.
And 9 times out of 10, when you open up, if you're having like a one-on-one conversation, when you open up about your personal journey of recovery, the other person is either going to respond, if not, oh, me too, they're going to say, oh, my brother, or oh, my dad, or oh, my cousin's really struggling right now, or something along those lines. And it's so interesting, man. We spend so much time trying to present ourselves as something that we're not, so that people will like and respect us. And it never works. No. But then the minute we get humble and we're like, hey, here's how low my life got, immediately that person is like, oh, you're somebody that I can speak to and connect with.
You're more real then. Yeah. It's that real. And I've talked to a lot of people on the phone. I'm on the phone probably more hours than I should with people, helping them with loved ones. Only when I say more hours than I should, only because I sometimes tend to not take care of myself when I do that. You know, but I'm helping people, helping parents understand. I'm helping people look. And, you know, my voice was able to help others be like, oh my gosh, you know, it's okay to not be okay.
Right, 100%.
And, you know, that way for yourself. I mean, there you were, you went from living in a car to Florida to treatment to a recovery home. You were working for FedEx, which was a job that you talked about. And then all of a sudden you got this job as an interventionist. Who are you working for now?
I work for Synergy Houses in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
And what does Synergy do?
I'm pumped to talk about Synergy. I love Synergy. So,
well, the name itself should make you pumped. You know?
Yeah. Synergy Houses is a 2-branch operation. One is our family services branch, which focuses on families on the front end of a residential treatment stay. Any and all operations and services surrounding that. So, interventions, right? We also do sober transport, sober companionship, family recovery coaching with addicted loved ones, treatment placement, stuff like that. We have a director of family services, brilliantly talented guy by the name of Sean Rogers. Shout out Sean Rogers. And he's our director of family services. He is also an intervention interventionist, excuse me. And on the back end of a residential treatment stay, we have a unique opportunity to really like have a 360 involvement for families, right? Like before someone's getting a treatment, we're helping them get there. And then after treatment, we have, you know, what I really do believe is a unique and incredible sober living program. So I don't know what your experience was in terms of treatment or any aftercare or anything like that, but for mine, I went to a really, really great residential treatment program. And then I went to a sober house, which was what I needed, right? It was good. It helped me not backslide. It had helped me not return to active addiction. But Synergy Houses was really built around a particular type of person. So we have our men's program and we have our women's program. Men's program's a little bit larger. It's that 18 to 35-year-old young adult male, more often than not, typically in their early 20s to mid 20s, who is, primary substance use disorder, almost always co-occurring mental health issues, anxiety, depression, bipolar, ADD, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And then the third piece is that individual who would fall squarely in that category of what we would call failure to launch, really struggling in the life skills piece. Yep. And that's who I was, you know? And so I just feel really lucky to be connected to them. But the way that the program works is, you know, we're helping someone after a residential treatment stay launch fully into adulthood. Through,
I love that.
Yeah, so, I mean, so it's like creating a platform to help someone build a life beyond their childhood bedroom. Our goal is that after somebody completes our program, their mom and dad is not going to worry about whether or not they're going to pay their electric bill, right? And so, you know, one thing that we talk about on both the intervention piece and on the part where we're trying to, you know, talk about the value of a sober living program, particularly for young people, I think, it's always drilled sobriety is the goal, sobriety is the goal, sobriety is the goal. You have to get sober. And that's true. But in a larger sense, I think what's much more meaningful for young people is sobriety is a resource. Meaning, if you get sober and you work a plan of recovery, you can build a life that you don't think that you can right now. It is possible.
I love that. And it's important for people to know that, like, the sobriety isn't all of it. It's a part of it. Mm-hmm. Because we then discover all the things that we didn't discover or know about ourselves while we were in active addiction. Yeah. Because we were hiding all that. Because we were covering it all up. So I love it. If somebody wants or needs treatment or help, how could they get a hold of Synergy House? What would be their best way?
It would be to call myself. You can certainly check out our website and see our offerings. Absolutely. Please check us out. But you can, should I give my phone number?
We could always put that on. I'm
sure can we add that?
You can add that. We
sure.
can give it at the end and they can add it. So that way you can put it up, we can put it up there so they can see it, because I would love that. Yeah. I mean, it's important for people to know. I mean, you know, and it's important for people to know that you have, you know, walked the talk.
Thanks, man.
You know,
as of you.
I appreciate that.
And sometimes, right? Like sometimes I do.
Yeah.
And then I have bad days.
Absolutely.
And the whole point of this is that we no longer have to get high when we have those bad days, and it's an opportunity to reassess and readjust and start getting back on a path towards personal recovery. Yeah,
and it's funny because, you know, I don't want to feel like that again.
Yeah, man.
What was the drug of choice for you?
I mean, I was a polysub guy, but really amphetamines is what really did me in.
I know that. I see. Whereas, you know, and the reason I ask that is because I also want people to realize that, you know, people in addiction, it's more than just one drug. Just because you're hearing about the opioid crisis out there today and the epidemic that is going on, that's not the only thing affecting it nowadays. There are people that have addictions to different types of, you know, of drugs that are out there that people don't really hear about because you don't hear about it on the news, and that, you know, and there's more than just drugs. We talked about earlier, gambling. Yeah. People forget that gambling is an addiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
You substituted. I mean, I know. Like there was a little stage here during COVID. I was down in Atlantic City hitting the slots. You know, like I'm bored. I'm gonna hit the slots. Yeah. I was substituting. You know, that's that dopamine. Like
search for dopamine. Search for anything beyond my immediate reality where I don't feel okay in my body. And all of those behaviors, I think, go. But so I remember the owner of the treatment center that I went to, which is the Augustine Recovery Center in St. Augustine, Florida. I'll give a quick shout out.
I like St. Augustine. Great little.
Yeah. And I just got really lucky that I ended up there. But
Nice.
he used to say, I remember he was giving a talk at a picnic one time, and he was like, people would always ask me, why do you get high? Like, why do you feel the need to get high? Why do you have to do it all the time? If this guy can take one, why do you need 20? If he can do it once a week, why do you need to do it 7 days a week? And his response was pretty simple, but it really, really echoed to me. It was that if you knew how I felt when I'm sober, you would never ask me why I got high. You know what I mean? And I think whether it's, drugs or gambling or electronics, which is another one that's like the gaming
just
treatment
screen time.
sector. Yeah, absolutely. It all ties into a need to escape who we are in our own bodies.
Escapism.
Yeah.
Escapism.
Yeah.
So such a powerful thing that people forget about too. And it's interesting, the inverse of what he said can be there too. If you knew what it felt like when I was high all the time, you wouldn't want to ever be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's
it
interesting.
works, inverse. Because I'm thinking about like, sometimes when I'm sober, I don't feel great. But I know if you ever felt the way I did when I was high, you wouldn't want to feel that.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Especially at the end, right?
Exactly. So, how many interventions have you done?
I've lost count, but I think somewhere around 15.
Okay, so let's get real. Are they all successful?
No.
No.
And
How do you feel about that?
I think that, so first off, I wish that every single time we did an intervention, the person ended up in treatment that day. However, what we are trying to do often is recontextualize what the intervention process is. So like a lot of times we'll get a call from a family and, they think that we're going to show up in a car, throw their loved one in it, tie them up if we have to, and drive them to treatment. And what we are more often than not successful with doing is trying to reposition addiction by taking the focus off of simply the person who's struggling with addiction and refocusing it and allowing the family to understand that addiction is a family disease. And the way that you treat the disease and ultimately put yourself in the position to provide your loved one with the most likely opportunity to pursue a path towards recovery is to treat the entire family. One thing that it's a lot, you have those like certain lines that you use again, just like in the rooms of AA. I'll always say that, addiction is a family disease. Everybody in the entire family system suffers from addiction.
Right.
The only person who's able to get any relief is the addict because they get to get high and the rest of the family just suffers.
They don't sleep, they worry,
And so the process of intervention is sending a message to the loved one struggling with addiction that the entire family is moving in a direction towards healing. Please come with us.
Right.
We have created an incredible opportunity for you to go do work on yourself so that you can live a better life and the life that you deserve. And if you don't, our relationship is going to change immediately in the following ways, so that we're sending the message that you're being fired as the decision maker in this family system. And that is a very procedural process. That is a very specific process with steps that need to be taken one at a time in order to send that message in a way that's going to appear loving.
Right.
But also as not a negotiation.
Yeah, this isn't like A and B. This is it. This is the final ultimatum.
Right.
It's do or die.
Right.
And it's a shame because not everybody does.
Right. So like a lot of times people will say yes at an intervention. A lot of times people will say no at an intervention. And then what happens is it becomes incredibly dependent upon what the family does after you get a no, which will ultimately affect whether or not, we call them IP, identified patient, whether or not the IP will end up in treatment. So and what I mean by that is when we're engaging in an intervention, what we're doing is we're gathering the people that are closest to the addicted loved one and we're confronting them. Now, who the person is and where they're at in life is going to change the context of how that meeting happens. But basically, it's a message that is delivered in three parts. For me, the way that I was trained, I'm a certified case manager interventionist, which means that I utilize the Johnson model, which is the model that more people are familiar with. It's the surprise model. The IP is not expecting that we're going to be approaching them and confronting them that day. My partner, Sean Rogers, is what's known as an ARISE trained interventionist. He'll utilize both, but his style sometimes is more invitational, in which you're inviting the person to a seat at the table to kind of meet them where they're at. And that kind of works better for like your person who's more autonomous and independent and isn't reliant on their parents as much. So, right, individual considerations for individuals. But the bulk of the messaging is we're preparing a crafted letter so that everything that we're going to say, at least in the beginning, has been established before we're walking into the room. And that letter needs to be formatted very specifically. So, the first part is a message of love, because if we're not speaking to the person who's underneath their active addiction in the moment, they're not going to be able to hear the rest of our message. When we get to the part where we're asking them to get help, they're going to be in such deep shame that they're going to be thinking, what is the point? So I'm always coaching families to start off by telling your loved one some of the things that you admire about them. Maybe share a specific memory of a time that was really happy and beautiful between you two. Talk about and talk to who are they underneath their active addiction. And that's a really important warm-up step. The second part of the letter is where we take the opportunity to smash through the delusion that the addict is currently living in. And typically, that part will begin, your addiction has affected me in the following ways. And this has to be done really carefully, because what it can't be is, you're an awful person, I don't love you anymore, that sort of thing is not helpful. Because
can't kick them when they're down already.
Sure, and it's just going to put somebody in shame. And the difference between shame and guilt is I did a bad thing and I want to adjust my behavior. Shame is I did a bad thing and I'm a bad person, what's the point?
Right.
And so it's a really fine line, but we're detailing objectively specific ways that we have been affected by our addicted loved one's behavior. Factual information. There was the time when we were at cousin Maggie's wedding and you fell through the table and caused a ruckus. This is not a personal story. I don't know.
It wasn't Maggie's wedding, but it was Steph's. But I was close to it, so it's all good.
I think that's a pretty common occurrence, right? Like
weddings. We laugh at it, but yeah, it's very common.
We like to show up at weddings and ruin them for some reason.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
Show up at the weddings and sit in the corner and rock.
Exactly.
Like, look at that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not about you,
right? And so we're going through that process where, again, we're breaking through the delusion that the addict is living in. We're not willing to ignore this anymore. We're going to shine a light on the situation for what it is in a very objective way, and we're going to tell you about it. And then the third part is a request for the IP to get help. And typically, I'm leaving. It's a pretty vague request for help. I'm going to handle the specifics during the conversation about specifically what help is going to look like when I have a chance to talk. But it's I love you. This is what's been happening. Please get help. And everybody in the room is going to have an opportunity to speak. Typically, and this has just been my approach, when IP walks in the room, I'm going to say, hi, my name is Brian. Your family asked me to come help organize this meeting today. They're really concerned for you. Here's how it's going to go. They're going to say what they have to say. You're going to have an opportunity to say whatever it is that you want to say, and then we're done, right? And all of that is true, right? Now, of course, I'm leaving out the part where we're talking about what happens and how the relationship dynamic is going to change ultimately if the person says no, but I'm laying it out like, if you get through this, just let us speak, this will be over, right?
Right.
And so, everybody in the intervention circle is going to have an opportunity to present that message to IP. And if at any time he or she interrupts and says, okay, I'll go, then we stop, right? We're not here to kick somebody while they're down or beat a dead horse. When we have that yes, we're going. And Now, that being said, I do think an important part of the intervention process is to allow the family the opportunity to say things that need to be said, probably have needed to be said for years and just haven't been said. And so typically on our way to treatment, I will take those letters with me and we'll give them to the person's primary counselor, and they'll have an opportunity to read those letters while they're in treatment. Now, if the person says no, we will engage in conversation. Typically, I'm leading a conversation, not negotiation, but, they're throwing out a lot of objections. And, we can talk about what some of those typically are if you'd like, but,
I could give you all of them.
Yeah, I'm sure. Exactly.
Who's going to take care of this? Who's going to do that?
Right.
I got this to do. I have that to do. Everything except for myself. Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And so you handle those on a one-on-one basis. Sometimes it's appropriate to sort of challenge those objections with logic. Other times it's more appropriate and more useful to simply sidestep them. Like, for example, one that I get all the time is, I'm not the problem. You're the problem, Mom. I have a drinking problem. You were drunk last night, right? And that happens a lot. And so one thing that I'm doing in the pre-intervention process is we're again, addiction's a family disease, right? So like, what is the family going to do to get their own help? So that when IP raises his hand and says, you're the problem, I'm not going to challenge that because it's not going to do any good. What I'm going to say is, guys, anyone here feel like they don't have things that they need to work on, right? What we're recognizing is that this situation has become untenable and the family is stuck in dysfunction and we are all getting our own help. Now, we've got a specific place that we've identified that's going to be the most appropriate way for you to get the help that you need, but Mom is going to therapy next week. Dad's taking a codependency workshop. Sister Annie is going to adult children of Alcoholics Anonymous meeting 3 times a week. And then I'll say to the family, is there anybody in this room who thinks that there is a chance that they have handled the situation with the IP perfectly, 100% without any errors? Raise your hand if that's the case. So of course, no hands are going to go up. And so in that case, it just doesn't make sense to argue with those objections. Right. You can kind of, again, meet them where they're at. Yep. And just say, you're right, man. We are all the problem, and we are resetting this family system, and so that everybody has space and time to work on themselves and heal.
And it's important that you said that, because when I speak to a lot of parents and brothers and sisters and stuff, I always say to them, well, what do you do to get assistance? What do you do for help? Because it's also important to realize that you need to seek it out too, whether it's a direct effect from what the person who is in active addiction is doing to you, or maybe help understand why they're there, or that you're not alone.
Yeah.
But a lot of people and families, I don't realize that, let's face it, they talk about it, that drugs and alcohol and addiction destroys families. It really does. But it also can help bring families together if they all try to understand it.
100%.
And they don't do that because a lot of families don't want to admit that problem is in their family.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, so I do, don't let me forget, I would like to, so what we want to talk about what happens when someone says no at the intervention and how that plays out. But regardless of whether they say yes or no, so my partner Sean is engaging in 4 weeks of structured family recovery calls with the rest of the family who is engaged in the intervention circle. And what that looks like is we're meeting once a week, and we're developing a plan for the family to get their own healing. And then on the final session, we're inviting the identified patient who's hopefully been at treatment this entire time back in to meet with the family. So he or she is going to share what he's been working on. They're going to share what they've been working on. And that is the coolest light switch moment, when the addict thinks, man, I've been sent away from my family to go work on myself, and I've had this problem that I had to, fix, and life is just going on without me, and my family's still going to be the same. And then he comes back into the circle, and Mom's like, yeah, I've been going to Al-Anon. I'm on step 4. I'm getting ready to do my inventory, and I'm going to be sharing my 5th step with my sponsor.
And I want parents to hear that if you have a loved one that is an addiction, Al-Anon is a great place to go and realize you are not alone. You're not special. Yeah. It's happening to you, and it may be destroying you, but it's also happening to other people, and you'll find comfort in those rooms.
Yeah, and be of service to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what does happen when I'm like, yeah, hey, Britt, you got to go. And I'm like, you know what? No, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't need help. You need help. You're all the problem. I'm not the problem. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I mean, great question, and that is probably the most common question that families give us.
I didn't use any F-bombs in that. I probably should have because I know that happens. So
yeah. And so first off, the way that we approach that in the moment typically depends on when in the intervention process that happens, right? So like, let's say you walk in the room and you say, who are you, dude? Like, what are you doing in my living room? Like, get out of here. I'm out of here, man. So my response to that typically is going to be something along the lines of, hey, Britt, I'm really sorry that we showed up uninvited. I understand how that can be really disconcerting and upsetting. I take total responsibility for that. We really felt it was important to talk to you, and we thought that there was a good chance that you might not show up if we approached you in a different way. And you may say, like, again, this is where you decide whether or not to face an objection or not. You may say, oh, I would have come. You should have just invited me. Well, I'm not going to I know that you wouldn't have come if I invited you. What I'm going to say is, you know what? I'm sorry. It was a misstep. Moving on. And then continue in the process. Now, if you walk in and say, I'm out of here, man. Like, this is BS. I'm not engaging in this. What I'm going to say is, and this is true, and honesty is always the best policy, except when it's not. We're always as honest with IP as we possibly can be, stopping short of something that's going to sabotage the process. So what I would say is that, Britt, no one is here to force you to do anything. And that's true. We're not. We're here to present somebody with a choice. What you need to know is there were some decisions that were made in the preparation for this meeting before we approached you today. And those decisions are going to have an impact on your life. And we really want you to be engaged in this part of the conversation so that you can have a say in what this is going to look like moving forward. But you need to know that if you walk out of the room, this meeting is going to continue with or without you. And that is the final part of the intervention that I didn't talk about. And that is what are often referred to as implementing of bottom lines, right? So we had the first part of the intervention is when we talked to them about love, how much we love them. The second part is smashing through the delusion and shining a light on, what's really been going on in their addiction. The third part is a request for them to get help. If after all of that, the person is still not accepting treatment, the fourth part of that is when we on a separate sheet of paper from the letter that's been, so you have your letter in front of you,
right?
And then on a separate sheet of paper, which has been sitting here, you have what are called your bottom lines. And that is when I will go around the intervention circle and ask each member to start reading their bottom lines, which begins, if you do not choose to accept the help that's being offered today, our relationship is going to change immediately in the following ways.
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah.
And every time you say that, it's almost like bringing back some PTSD. So.
Yeah, and
but it's true.
It's so uncomfortable, but
it's very uncomfortable. And it's funny that you say, because there's a friend of mine who she had said it to me, and I was sort of like, she ain't changing shit, and it changed drastically. And to this day, we're friends, but that changed us. So anyway,
that's interesting. No, but so like you hit the nail on the head. One thing that we're always talking to families about is, do not put anything on that list that you will not 100% stick to, because that is what's going to happen. Let's say we get to those bottom lines, and so just what they are a lot of the times is, okay, so more often than not, the addict is being financially supported in some way, right? Like that's going to change immediately. Oftentimes they're being provided a home to live in. That is going to change immediately. Sometimes there's a little bit more digging that needs to be talked about in order to find what the enabling behavior is. But that could be, are you keeping secrets for this person? Are you covering up for them? Are you lying for them? Are you minimizing the consequences? Are you offering too much emotional support that allows them to wallow in their self-pity and project and deflect from their own responsibility? And what are the things that you're going to realistically be able to stop doing today if your loved one does not go to treatment?
Because if not, you're part of the problem then.
Yeah, exactly.
Not part of the solution. That's when that word enabling comes into play. And we don't like to use it because you don't want to say that you're enabling anybody. However, I think a lot of times parents and loved ones don't really know how to help without enabling. Sometimes it's easier. I'm going to give you $20. Just be quiet.
Yeah.
And I just pray that this is the last time So, and it's funny you say, because that is the bottom line.
Right.
I think, an ultimatum bottom line is something that nobody likes, whether you're sober or not.
Yeah.
And to do that, especially from a loved one that's going to cut you off, it's like, that hits home.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and then they still say no.
They do still sometimes say no. I think so. The message behind the bottom lines in an intervention, the overall encompassing message of those is, I am here today because I'm willing to do absolutely anything I can in order to support your recovery, and absolutely nothing at all anymore that's going to support your active addiction. That is the message of an intervention. And so if after that message, the IP still says no, what we do then is we're keeping the intervention circle, the family unit, really tight. And we are making sure that they know that they're supporting each other in implementing those bottom lines.
Nice.
So that when IP leaves the circle, runs out the door, gets in his car, and by the way, like we're taking steps to minimize those risks. That's another question I get a lot. And that can be anything from removing a license plate from their car if it's in their parents' name, things like that.
Right.
But should they leave the intervention circle, what they are saying is, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you're going to stick to those promises that you just said about changing our relationship, and I'm going to test that. And so a lot of times people think that when somebody leaves an intervention and they say no, that means that the intervention has failed. But that just means that it's still going. The intervention continues until the person ends up in treatment. And so what that will look like a lot of times is, if this person still has friends in their life, they're going to go to a friend's house, and they're going to remain in their active addiction, and they're going to begin to call the family.
Right.
And at this point, this is where I'm coaching the family. If you get a call from your loved one and they're trying to engage in a negotiation with you, your only role is to direct them back to me, right? Listen, Johnny, I am so sorry. I'm so overwhelmed with this. This is exactly why we hired a professional. We are in over our heads. We don't know what to do. The family system is completely dysfunctional. Please call Brian. And when the IP comes back to the family and tries to engage in, the old push and pull of emotional manipulation and all of that sort of thing, and watches the family system hold tight, and then even furthermore, engage in steps towards their own healing, like all the things that we talked about, because they're still doing those, right? They're still going to go to their Al-Anon meeting. They're still going to go to therapy. Aunt Margie's still going to go to her yoga class this week. I have an Aunt Margie. That's
okay. I was like, that's a good name, Margie.
Yeah, and so as the time goes on from the intervention, typically what will happen is all enabling behaviors have been removed. The person is noticing that the family dynamic has shifted, and they've been fired as the decision maker in the process. They can't control through emotional manipulation and deflection and pointing fingers. Nothing that they do is changing the outcome that the family is moving towards healing. And many times we will get a call days, weeks, months later. Okay, I'm ready to go. And that is a successful intervention. So it's that was a very long answer to your question about, not all interventions work. Yeah, some people never end up in treatment, but as long as the family is holding tight and we're engaging with them in a process, there is always a chance that an intervention will turn into a success.
So as an interventionist, how does this help your healing?
Well, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Well,
just came up with it.
So I mean, the honest answer is it helps, and it's also a challenge.
That was going to be the next one. How does it hurt your healing?
Yeah. So, I got into this. So the way that I got into interventions is the interventionist that intervened on me, the one that my family hired. Sam Davis, right? Yeah.
Shout out to Sam.
My man Sam. Turned 50 on Monday. Happy birthday,
nice.
Sam.
Happy birthday, Sam.
So, years later, I was working for FedEx, right? And trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. Did not want to go back to medical sales, selling diapers. And I got a call from somebody close to me who knew that I was in recovery and had a loved one who needed an intervention. So I directed that person to Sam. I hadn't seen Sam in, I guess like 3.5 years at that point. The last time I saw him was when he was driving me to treatment.
Which is good that you didn't have to see him.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, people will be like, oh, why not? Well, I didn't need to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
But So I gave that person Sam's number. They ended up hiring Sam for the intervention. Because I was close to that person and because of my own experience, I was invited into the intervention circle, and I reconnected with Sam at that moment. We do the intervention. The IP says yes. Again, because of my experience, Sam asked, and that was a trippy moment, man. Like seeing him, like, you know, last time I saw him was legitimately rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then to see him healthy again was, you know, it's one of the more memorable moments of my life. For
Another
sure.
full circle moment.
Yeah.
Which is sick.
It was cool.
That right there is what feeds the ego too.
Yeah.
It's a positive.
Yeah.
Love it. And I love that.
So we drive him to treatment, and then we're on our way back, and Sam's just kind of asked me, like, what are you doing with your life, man? I'm like, oh, you know, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm working a recovery job. I'm trying to do the next right thing. Sometimes I do good, sometimes I do bad, but I'm figuring it out little by little. He's like, do you ever think about doing interventions? And then, so that's kind of how it happened. And then he directed me towards CCMI certification course, which is a 125-hour course, which stands for Certified Case Manager Interventionist. So case management piece being the stuff that we talked about on the back end, the working with the family, like not just we're getting your loved one to treatment and then we're disappearing. It's no, this is a case that we're gonna manage with you. And then when that happened, I was really, really, obviously, really like, oh my God, you know, God job. It finally happened. I figured out what I want to do with my life, which is a really wonderful feeling until you start to do it and I got lazy with my recovery, because if you work in this field, and I know that, you know, with your sober living stuff, maybe you can relate to this. Like, I have a tendency, I don't need to go to a meeting today.
No.
I don't need to be working the steps again. I've already been through the steps. I don't need to get a sponsor and call my sponsor. I'm helping people get in it. I'm saving lives.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm saving lives.
I don't need that anymore. I'm already working my recovery this end.
But I'm getting paid for it.
Yes.
Right? And
it's your job.
Yeah. And
Whereas recovery homes, I'm not getting paid for it. Trust me.
But so, you know, that, so it's an interesting balance in that there is nothing that gives me more satisfaction and meaning and purpose than getting somebody into treatment, and then actually not only that, but like seeing them complete treatment and then staying engaged in recovery. That's, you know, it's one of the very best parts of my life. But the downside of that is, like, that can't be my higher power, right? Like, being a successful interventionist cannot, I need to still focus inward and know that, like, whether or not this guy goes to treatment or not does not affect, you know, my overall worth, and it doesn't affect what I need to do on a day-to-day basis to remain engaged in a path of recovery. And then the other thing is that, you know, there is a tendency to take on a lot of trauma from the family. Because we're dealing with, and I'm sure you deal with it in the sober living aspect as well, like, we're dealing with very sick families. And
they want you to have all the answers.
They want you to have the answers, and oftentimes they will struggle with taking direction, which is only natural, right? Like, these are not experts in recovery.
The answers are what I've told you 5 times already, and you haven't listened. So how do I tell you a 6th time differently?
And how do you stay empathetic with that person
without becoming jaded or bitter towards it?
Right.
You know, and that's important to know.
Yeah.
That happens.
Mm-hmm.
That happens. So I always say, though, and it pertains to you, how can you be first rate at your work if your work is all you are?
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point.
If you continue to just be your work and just be, you know, Brian the interventionist, you lose all sense and aspect of who Brian Schultz really is as the person and individual, because that's only a small cog of it. And I know, I don't know you well, but I know you're probably like me, that if you're going to devote your time to something, you want to be as good and as perfect at as you can, and you're going to hone that, and you're going to throw your all into it, then you're going to forget those blinders of everything else out here. Yeah. So what do you do for Brian Schultz as Brian Schultz? What do you do for Brian? What do you do to make life better? You know, without take the meetings away, take the recovery away. What do you do for you?
Yeah, good question.
Thank you. Another one. See,
it ebbs and flows, right? Okay. Like sometimes I will let the job take over, or like for quite a while I had a real problem with just being on the phone all the time and like taking calls at any given night from any family member and struggling to set boundaries and things like that. And some of those stuff would fall by the wayside. And what's interesting is like, I found that like when if I'm going through something in my personal life, I find it like, it's like a snap that allows me to return to some passions that like I forgot about. Like, so these days what I'm trying is I'm trying like a new experiential activity every couple weeks that I've never done before. So like I did indoor skydiving 2 weeks ago.
Which is sick, and I love it out there at iFly.
It was so much
that's
fun,
so cool.
man.
That's
Did you do
awesome.
it?
I did it once, yeah.
Did you do the high fly thing?
Yeah, you just get in that suit and then you just you go up. It's like it's a rush.
He kept telling me not to look down, but I couldn't stop. I was just like, whoa, what's going on?
That's great.
Yeah.
I saw you post that, which is good.
Yeah.
You need to do things like that.
Yeah.
Get your adrenaline going somehow, something that's going to bring new life to you.
Yeah.
You know?
That, hiking a lot.
Okay.
Did some indoor rock climbing when I was out in Utah a little bit. But like one thing again, and it changes, but like what I'm very much trying to do is, again, sobriety is a resource, right? And so one thing that we say about Synergy all the time is that all of our staff members are people in long-term recovery. And our co-founder, or our founder, Timmy Brooks, is, you know, if you're in the, you know, Westchester area, I think most people know Timmy's story, and, you know, I don't want to tell his story, but just like because he does it so well. But the basics of it are, you know, he was a young man who at 18 years old was facing 18 felony charges for drug-related crimes, and pursued a path of recovery at a really difficult time in his life, and does what he says and says what he does, and really believes wholeheartedly in the benefits of living a life of recovery. And so when he's looking to hire people at Synergy, one of the parts of our process is for these young guys who are coming into our sober living program, we are putting people, and women too, we do have a women's house, the same philosophy applies. We are hiring people who are in long-term recovery who are living examples of an attractive life in recovery.
I love it.
Sobriety is a resource. If you can't replace addiction with something that is going to give your life purpose and meaning and be enjoyable, then what is the point?
Absolutely.
Right?
So I just want to ask your personal opinion on this, though, and you can keep it short, of course, so how do you feel about people that are, you know, in recovery, but they're on the maintenance meds? Is that
like
recovery?
Controlled substances and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like say Sublocade. Like, is that sobriety? I mean, there's that big thing.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a professional. I'm just the Brian answer.
Yeah, sure. I certainly don't have I'm not a clinician. Professionally, I don't think
Most
that I'm
people
qualified.
think they are, though, so.
I don't think I'm qualified to weigh in on that. And what I would say is, like, is your life better than it was when you were putting a needle in your arm? Awesome, man. Good for you. Yeah, like.
Recovery your way.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that. I have a lot of people who look at me and be like, how can you say that? Yeah. How can I not? How can I tell you, Brian, how to work your recovery and be successful?
Sure.
That's only you can do that. Who am I to say that the methadone clinic isn't working for somebody or that it's just keeping them high? That's just an opinion now.
Yeah.
I've never experienced. I'm not that person who lives with that. But if they're not putting the needle in their arm, if they're not taking the pill, if they're not putting the pipe to their mouth, they're winning. Mm-hmm. And it's recovery their way.
Yeah.
And you know, I got to look at that. And, you know, I think that, you know, people have to look in it's 2023, it's almost 2024. And we've lost so many lives. It is. I've lost time. COVID, I'm still in that 2-year phase of like, did it really happen?
I still say 2020 sometimes.
Yeah.
It seemed forever.
I think it's 2018 was only like last year or 2 years ago. People are like, do you remember in 2018? I'm like, yeah, well, last year, you know. Yeah. But, you know, you know, we've lost so many lives in this war on drugs.
Yeah.
And it's become not even a war anymore. It's just become this epidemic that has overtaken our country. And, you know, if somebody is going to stay, you know, clean off, and that word, if they're going to say sober off of what was killing them, so be it.
Yeah.
Do I believe in the California method of recovery, the way they call it? No, but once again, that's not me. If it's helping them, it's helping them.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear you say that.
I do really mean that. I do also think there is kind of like a danger in there, right? Because like harm reduction is great, and maintenance is great if it's working for you, but my question would always be, is it really working for you?
Yes.
And are you living a life where, you know, you are taking care of yourself and you're actually healthy in your own mind, body, and spirit? And are you at a point where you're, whether or not you're putting substances in your body, like, how is your life affecting your loved one's life around you? Have you actually engaged in a path of recovery where, you know, you are okay, you know?
Yep, and I see that because one of our recovery homes was maintenance. We were accepting maintenance at the time there, and one of the guys in there spent a year, but he was on methadone, and I didn't see a progress.
Yeah.
I didn't see a forward evolution in a year, and it was really sad. You know, he wasn't picking up what was destroying him, but he was relying upon the methadone every day. And to me, there's got to be a time in some people's lives where you got to become more productive, and more functioning. Not saying you're not, but there's going to be that battle. But once again, if people are in recovery and it's working for them and it's not harming them and their loved ones, so be it.
Yeah.
But
progress,
if it is,
not perfection.
There
right?
you go. I like that. Progress, not perfection. Because there's no such thing as perfection. No such thing. What are some words that you could give to people who right now, you know, take the interventionist away from it and those fancy letters behind your name for what you do, like just take it down and peel the layers back to the Brian Schultz? What would you tell the person that is sitting across from you that is, you know, suffering and is in pain? What would you tell them? No clinician response.
I would tell them that you don't know how this is all going to play out yet. You know, without a doubt, at the time, the day of my intervention was the very worst day of my life, the very lowest moment of my life. And now, 5 years later, it is absolutely, without a doubt, the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
I love it.
And I think that if you're hopeless, I can understand, but you're still wrong. And there is hope.
There is hope. Right there, I love it. And that's a perfect thing to say to somebody. And, you know, I think it becomes cliche, and sometimes people just use the word hope in different terms, and it's sort of lost maybe a connotation of what, you know, it really stands for. But there is.
Yeah.
There is, you know, if you can just see it and take away some of that cloudiness and realize that it can be a better tomorrow if you just focus on it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what you were saying earlier about like the whole ego thing, and that's kind of where we started this conversation. Yeah. It's like, I always think about when people get up at meetings to get their chips, and that can always kind of feel sort of like self-congratulatory, but I've heard the old timers in AA say, like, you're not going up there to get your chip so that people can clap for you. You're going up there to get your chip to show to the guy who's got 1 day clean that you can put together 5 years, 8 years. Like that is what the process of marking time is about. It's for the person who doesn't have hope that things can get better. You're wrong, because look at all of these people who were in that same spot at one point and no longer feel that way.
Yeah, and if people think it can't get better, you're sitting here with 13 years combined of how it could get better, and we probably never expected to be where we're at. I honestly never expected to be alive today. Hoping I wasn't alive today. That was hope for me back then. That was my hope. That was, you know, just to end that pain. But, you know, once, you know, I took that pain away and I had people, you know, who helped me take it away, I feel so much better. It's such a great place to be.
Yeah, man. I'm glad you're still around.
Yeah, me too. It's, you know, it's one of those things that, like, you don't know how good it is until you experience it. People can tell you and tell you and tell you all the beauty that it is outside of the addiction, but you really don't believe it till you experience it. And there is so much. Mm-hmm. There's so much, but it's not easy. And I don't want people to think it is. And I don't want people to think, hey, you know what? I just hit 30 days. The rest of life is smooth. Hell no. That's when the hard work begins. That's when the real work begins. Yeah.
Well, you talked about how you didn't used to like to share your experience of recovery.
And no, that was the ego part.
Yeah. And now I think that for me, I had a similar kind of, evolution around it, but I lost my train of thought.
It's all good.
Well, so I think that, you know, it's like we didn't want to share our past of you know, being addicts because of the shame around it. But what you just mentioned about the hard work, like, you know, and this is, I don't want to be too self-congratulatory here, but I think that anybody who has embraced a path of recovery and used to struggle with addiction, like I didn't get high today. You know what I mean? And that has been the hardest thing that I've done in my life. And I think that when you recontextualize it, it's something to be proud of.
It is. And people have to see that. And, you know, it's funny because I never wanted to tell people I was in recovery. And today I don't shut up about it. Like, if somebody says something to me like, oh, no, I'm in recovery.
Yeah,
like,
we can be really annoying, too.
You know, really.
Yeah.
Like, okay, great, good for you. You want to start? No, I got my chip. We're good. You know, it's like, you know, or somebody's like, you want anything? You don't want a beer or starting to drink? No, I don't drink. I just want water. Thank you.
Yeah, and you want everybody in the room to hear.
it. Like, because, once again, I want that. It's part of that ego, I think. But it's also, once again, sharing your story, bringing awareness. And if you take that away, and that's what you're doing, man. You have brought awareness to a disease that is killing people, you know, to the disease that is killing people. It is a disease, you know, it isn't just a me thing, it's a we thing, because it's affecting everybody. And, you know, you are, like I said, you're walking the talk, and I love that.
Thanks, man.
That just
you are
excited,
too.
you know, and so, you know, we'll put the number up there, your number up there. So if anybody wants to contact you or talk about, you know, how they can get their loved ones or themselves even.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. And I would just say that, you know, picking up the phone and calling, I think is, it might even be the most difficult part of the intervention process, is like making the initial phone call. And what I would say to anybody who is considering, you know, is my loved one really that bad, or is it my place to interject? I think that it always helps to start with the information gathering phase. Like, if you have questions about what is a residential treatment center supposed to do? What is a good one like? What is a bad one like? What happens after treatment? What is this thing I hear about called outpatient services?
What's the difference between a recovery and a trap house?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I had to throw that little comical humor in there because it just seems that every sober living house is like on the same block as a trap house somewhere. So
it's a good business model, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and it works.
But if you are in that point where you are considering what is the right path forward, then I would say you're past the point where you should be reaching out and just exploring your options. Because I think that families feel so powerless, and they think about, man, intervention, that sounds so drastic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right path forward for you, but you will never know until you do some work to get educated. And, you know, gaining the knowledge about what the process is like and how it works and all of those things is a very scary thought. But once you start to figure out, you know, what it's all about, it becomes pretty self-evident about, you know, is this something that my loved one needs?
Right on. I love it. This has been great. This conversation has been great.
It's fantastic.
You know, I don't know if people realize it, but when I do have conversations like this with people like yourself, it helps me.
Yeah, me too, man.
Helps me to realize it. I mean, I want people to realize out there that, you know, people just don't all of a sudden one day decide to say, hey, I want to do drugs, and this is great, that there are underlying factors behind it. Somebody has experienced a trauma of some type. Somebody is escaping, you know, their world, and that's really what it is. So when people say to me, well, you had the choice to do it. Yeah, we had the choice to pick up, but the disease tells us that we can't stop, and that there's, you know, so that's so important for people to hear. And, you know, you hit that, and just to hear that there is hope, there's a chance, you know, and,
yes, there is.
And you're doing a great job, and I love that. And, you know, Synergy has a great reputation and a great name, and it just sounds like a place that you want to go to get, you know, revitalized, you know. So congratulations, everybody. Synergy. You tell Timmy that if he ever wants to have a sit-down conversation, I welcome him to do that, because we are friends on social media, but in real life, once again, you know, never been there. One thing I'm going to ask you, you know, we talk about this, and because it's called Be a Voice, and that's what we are. We're voices for things, and we talk about. But if you really had to peel those layers back and tell me, Brian, that one thing that you would be a voice for, what would it be? heard that pin drop.
Well, I don't want to say something cliche like a recovering person for addiction, but I mean, I think specifically, the guy who was told that he would never reach the guy who was told that he was not reaching his potential. I think that like my whole life I've kind of felt that there was something more that I could be doing, and I think there was a long part of my life where I definitely thought that was no longer a possibility. That I was past the point where, there was going to be that opportunity to reach my potential. And I'm certainly, hopefully I'm not there yet, right? Like who wants to reach their potential because there's nowhere to go up.
You peak and all of a sudden it's like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah. But I guess like I would like to be a voice for the guy who thought it was too late and then found out that it's not.
Love it. And that's it. And you are right now. You are the epitome of that for sure.
Thanks.
And that is what it's about. And it's not cliche. I mean, it's never cliche. Because the more we say it to people, the more it is. I mean, listen, everybody posts on social media when they're raising their glasses and having drinks and celebrating. Why can't we be the voice for those that we can still raise a bottle of water and celebrate? That is okay to do.
Yeah,
There's nothing wrong with that. So it's never cliche, man. Never cliche. But thank you so much for doing this today.
Britt, this was a blast, man. I love what you guys are doing here, and thank you to everybody in there that we can't see.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you thanked them because now it just saves me at the end from going through it and thanking them all and,
they killed it,
feeding
man.
their egos because they love that. But, once again, if anybody out there is looking for an interventionist or needs an interventionist or just needs a little bit of guidance, we're going to put Brian's number up there so you can see it. But contact Brian Schultz. He is an amazing individual. He's doing some great things out there in the recovery community. Like you heard him say, not every day is going to be winning, but it's the days that you get up and you make it work are going to be the ones that count in your life. So make that happen. Brian, thanks again, man.
Thanks, Britt.
Stick with it. I look forward to hearing 6
too,
years
brother.
from you. All right? Definitely. So, and everybody else out there, he already thanked everybody back there in the booth. Thanks to those guys for always keeping me on track. You guys are all right. I don't care what anybody else says. And to everybody else, remember, whatever it is you stand for, be a voice. This is Britt Carpenter, Interventionist Media. Have a great rest of your day.